So the book I chose to read today is called Jumanji, and the illustrator and the author are actually the same person, and this person is Chris von Allsburg, and it was copyrighted in 1981 and published by Houghton Mifflin. So I chose the age group that could read this to be 7 to 9 years old, maybe a little bit older, and I chose this because first of all, the exposition and the climax and the resolution, they're very well written. So in the exposition, the characters are introduced in a very simple way, so we can really relate to the characters and we don't get confused over who each person was and how they're related to each other or what their connection is to the conflict. And the climax, it's very exciting and it'll help hold the attention of these kids and keep them interested. And then the resolution, it's a happy ending, so they're not sitting there for the rest of the school day not being able to pay attention because they're sitting there biting their nails like, oh my gosh, what's happening to these characters? Why don't I have a resolution? On top of that, I think the illustrations are very well drawn. The author / illustrator, Chris von Allsburg, he clearly drew the emotions on the characters' faces. Now, I think this is a very important factor and why I chose the 7 to 9 age group, because at their age, they're learning how to empathize with characters, and I think being able to see the emotions clearly on their faces will help them empathize, creating a deeper connection, really, between them and the characters, because they're able to relate to them. On top of that, the characters in this book are around their same ages, maybe a little bit older. And in our literature book, our children's literature book, it talks about how this age group, they like to read what they can relate to. So they're around the same age group and they're living in the world that they know too, except of course the game Jumanji throws a few issues towards the kids' way that obviously they can't relate to. But that's the fun, exciting part that they'll be able to keep focus on. So let's get started. Now remember, Mother said, your father and I are bringing some guests by after the opera, so please keep the house neat. Quite so, added Father, tucking his scarf inside his coat. Mother peered into the hall mirror and carefully pinned her hat into place. Then knelt and kissed both of her kids goodbye. When the front door closed, Judy and Peter giggled with delight. They took all the toys out of their toy chest and made a terrible mess. But their laughter slowly turned into silence till finally Peter slouched in the chair. You know what, he said. I'm really bored. Me too, Judy said. Why don't we go outside and play? Peter agreed, so they set off across the street to the park. It was cold for November. The children could see their breath like steam. They rolled in the leaves, and when Judy tried to stuff some leaves down Peter's sweater, he jumped behind a tree. When his sister caught up to him, he was kneeling at the foot of the tree looking at a long, thin box. What's that? Judy asked. It's a game, said Peter, handing her the box. Jumanji, Judy read from the box. A jungle adventure game. Look, said Peter, pointing at a note taped to the bottom of the box. In childlike handwriting were the words, free game. Fun for some, but not for all. P.S. Read instructions carefully. Want to take it home? Judy asked. Not really, said Peter. I'm sure somebody left it here because it's so boring. Oh, come on, protested Judy. Let's give it a try. Race you home. And off she ran with Peter at her heels. At home, the children spread the game out on the card table. It looked very much like games they already had. There was a board that unfolded, revealing a path of colored squares. The squares had messages written on them. The path started in the deepest jungle and ended up at Jumanji, a city of golden buildings and towers. Peter had to shake the dice and play with the other pieces that were in the box. Put those down and listen, said Judy. I'm going to read the instructions. Jumanji, a young people's jungle adventure, specially designed for the bored and restless. A. Player selects piece and places it in the deepest jungle. B. Player rolls dice and moves piece a long path through the dangers of the jungle. C. First player to reach Jumanji and yell the city's name out loud is the winner. Is that all? Asked Peter, sounding very disappointed. No, said Judy, there's one more thing, and this is in capital letters. D. Very important. Once the game of Jumanji is started, it will not be over until one person reaches the city of gold. Oh, big deal, said Peter, who gave a bored yawn. Here, said Judy, handing her brother the dice. You go first. Peter casually dropped the dice from his hand. 7, said Judy. Peter moved his piece to the 7th square. Lion attacks. Move back 2 spaces, read Judy. Gosh, how exciting, said Peter in a very unexciting voice. As he reached for his piece, he looked up at his sister. She had a look of absolute horror on her face. Peter, she whispered, turn around very, very slowly. The boy turned in his chair. He couldn't believe his eyes. Lying on the piano was a lion, staring at Peter and licking his lips. The lion roared so loud it knocked Peter right off his chair. The big cat jumped to the floor. Peter was up on his feet, running through the house with the lion at a whisker's length behind. He ran upstairs and dove under a bed. The lion tries to squeeze under, but his head got stuck. Peter scrambled out, ran from the bedroom, and slammed the door behind him. He stood in the hall with Judy gasping for air. I don't think, said Peter in between gasps of air, that I want to play this game anymore. But we have to, said Judy as she helped Peter back downstairs. I'm sure that's what the instructions mean. That line won't go away until one of us wins the game. Peter stood next to the card table. Can't we just call the zoo to take him away? From upstairs set the sounds of growling and clawing on the bedroom door. Or maybe we can just tell Father when he comes home. No one would come from the zoo because they wouldn't believe us, said Judy. And you know how upset Mother would be if there was a lion in the bedroom. We started this game and now we have to finish it. Peter looked down at the board game. What if Judy rolled a 7? There would be 2 lions. For an instant, Peter thought he was going to cry. Then he sat firmly in his chair and said, Let's play. Judy picked up the dice and rolled an 8 and moved her piece. Monkeys steal food. Miss 1 turn. She read. From the kitchen came sounds of banging pots and falling jars. The children ran in to see a dozen monkeys tearing the room apart. Oh boy, said Peter, this would upset Mom even more than the lion. Quick, said Judy, back to the game. Peter took his turn. Thank heavens he landed on a blank space. He rolled again. Monsoon season begins. Lose 1 turn. Little raindrops began to fall in the living room. Then a roll of thunder shook the walls and scared the monkeys out of the kitchen. The rain began to fall in buckets as Judy took the dice. Guide gets lost, lose 1 turn. The rain suddenly stopped. The children turned to see a man hunched over at a map. Oh dear, I say, spot of bad luck now, he mumbled. Perhaps left turn here. No, a right turn here. Yes, absolutely. I think a right turn, or maybe... Excuse me, said Judy, but the guide just ignored her. Around here, then over... No, over here and around this. Yes, good, but then... Judy just shrugged her shoulders and handed the dice to Peter. "4, 5, 6, he counted. Bitten by tisty fly, contract sleeping sickness, lose 1 turn. Judy heard a faint buzzing noise and watched a small insect land on Peter's nose. Peter lifted his hand to brush the bug away, but then stopped, gave a tremendous yawn, and fell sound asleep, his head on the table. Peter, wake up, cried Judy, but it was no use. She grabbed the dice and moved to a blank. She rolled again and waited in amazement. Rhinoceros stampede, go back 2 spaces. As fast as he had fallen asleep, Peter awoke. Together they listened to a rumble in the hallway. It grew louder and louder. Suddenly, a herd of rhinos charged through the living room and into the dining room, crushing all the furniture in their path. And all of the dining stuff started to break. Peter and Judy covered their ears as sounds of splintering wood and breaking china filled the house. Okay, so that's when I'm going to stop reading. Overall, I don't know about you guys, but if I was the main characters right now, I would be freaking out, trying to figure out how to fix all these stuff before mom and dad come home. If you look throughout this entire story, though, you see our characters trying to handle a lot of different conflicts that nobody ever in their life would expect to even have to handle. Like the first obstacle, when the lion on page 3 popped out behind the piano and tried to eat Peter and Judy. And then the rhinos on page 9, when they're coming through crushing all of the china and all of the wood and all of the furniture. So if you really look back through all the pages, try to think, how would you relate to the characters? How would you handle it if you were them? And honestly, I'm gonna have to think a lot about that one. But next time we read this story and the rest of this chapter, we will learn about many different obstacles that they face throughout this chapter and how they try to handle them, how they decide is the best tactic to go about their day and try to solve all these issues together as brother and sister. So thank you for listening to my story, and I'll see you next time.